it started this morning early with the removal of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. We know that that came because of the article she wrote in the Times, and largely actually because of her comments around policing. The Prime Minister had waited over the weekend, and those protests, of course, had taken place in London before removing her incredibly early, to be replaced by James Cleverly, who at the time was the Foreign Secretary. That triggered the appointment of David Cameron, and I think that will be the moment of this reshuffle, no matter what happens next, because it's not finished yet, and it is a wide-ranging reshuffle. David Cameron walking up Downing Street here this morning, to the shock and surprise of every single reporter here, because there was not a whisper of this appointment, is really the defining moment. And I think, coming into this reshuffle, all of the conversation had been around, well, how does the Prime Minister lessen the impact of removing Suella Braverman? How does he keep his party from exploding, because many people in the party will not like it? Actually, the fact that David Cameron is now in position has taken a lot of the sting out of that. Now, that's true today. It may not be true tomorrow. There is a meeting later today of backbench Conservative MPs who are really frustrated by the removal of Suella Braverman. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be a tussle now for which way the party goes from here, who is really running the Conservative Party under Rishi Sunak. I think that tension is very real. But the story so far of this reshuffle is some pretty big new appointments, including in the more junior positions. So Greg Hands, for example, he's been removed as party chair, replaced by Richard Holden, who was the Transport Minister before that. He's been quite a lot, he's been front and centre quite a lot on the media recently for the party, so there was an expectation he could be promoted. Steve Barclay, who was the Health Secretary, he's been demoted. He now replaces Therese Coffey at DEFRA. She was sacked today. Victoria Atkins is the new Health Secretary. That's a promotion for her. She's seen as a steady pair of hands. She was in the Treasury before. Steve Barclay, as I mentioned, goes to DEFRA. Laura Trott is the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury, leaving John Glenn currently out of a position, although we expect that he may well be moved, possibly to the Cabinet Office, although we're still waiting to hear. And there are other junior ministerial appointments that we're still waiting to see too, a couple of those housing, health and schools. Housing is an interesting one. There have been 6 housing secretaries since 2022, which just shows you, the Housing Secretary who was currently in position, who was until today, Rachel McLean, posted publicly saying she was disappointed to be removed. She was about to take forward a huge piece of legislation that was centre of the Prime Minister's recent conference speech. So an interesting decision, that one. But lots of these changes will have an impact on policy and on all of us. So we'll have to wait till the end of it to find out what it all really means, but some significant moves.
The deal is not completed. But what shade does this make the Tory party now? What direction do you immediately see has been taken?
Well, that's the big question, really. If you'd have asked me that this morning, the appointment of David Cameron, it's very difficult to get past that, because this is a former Prime Minister. He's been out of the game for a very long time. He's now come back into a very senior role at a time when there is huge conflict around the world. But he brings with him quite a lot of baggage, actually. I was speaking to one former Cabinet Minister this morning who said it's a mad appointment. David Cameron is not credible, he's not trusted, he doesn't represent the party as they believe it should be represented. I wonder whether by the end of the day we'll be looking at this from the perspective of Rishi Sunak trying to shore up some of the votes in the south of the country. So some of those votes in Surrey, the home counties, that maybe could have been leached away from them in an election by the Liberal Democrats. There's a question about what happens with the Red Wall. Has Rishi Sunak given up on the Red Wall, for example? The appointment of Richard Holden might be a nod to that. He, of course, is a Durham MP and very vocal for that wing of the party. I think until the end of the day it's hard to say for certain, but there will be Tories inside Westminster who will come away from this thinking, right, the party's moved away from that kind of culture wars stuff, the very vocal division, the kind of tension politics, if you like, that Rishi Sunak seemed to have been pursuing, and much more towards what David Cameron used to represent, which was a centrist position. The question is, would that work in an election?
It's quite a different look, isn't it? And actually different isn't the right word at all, Kate. I mean, it's a look from times gone by, isn't it? There are no women or people from non-public schools in those top 4 key positions of state.
Yeah, and again, that will be something that I think will cause some people a moment of pause. I mean, you have seen promotion for some talented women in the party. Laura Trott, for example, as I mentioned, is now Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Interestingly, she was an advisor under David Cameron when he was formerly Prime Minister, as was Oliver Dowden. And Vicky Atkins' appointment as Health Secretary, I think, will be seen as a good move. But you're right, those most senior positions are held by men, and actually men who went to public school. which for a Prime Minister who just a few weeks ago was determined to prove that he was very different, that he wasn't like everything that had gone before him, that he was a marked change, is pretty much a complete U-turn on all of that. And there will be some people who ask, well, you know, if your strategy was right then, so right that you were determined to make it the key to your conference speech, and you now seem to be saying that it's wrong, can we really trust that you have a direction and that you know what will be successful in the next election? The other point on that worth mentioning is you're seeing a lot of junior ministers leave, people like Will Quince and others who were quite steady in their positions and well respected. They're leaving ahead of leaving Parliament altogether at the next election. And usually reshuffles are about reinvigoration, they're about a new direction of travel. I think a lot of these decisions are being forced on Rishi Sunak because of his MPs leaving Parliament.